everybody. So this is a spoiler video for Warcraft, which just came out this past weekend. With me today, I've got Dan.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
And Rasco.
Hello, everybody.
So we were going to do this as a live show, but after about 20 minutes of technical glitches and not knowing what the hell's going on, we just kind of gave up and went to Skype. So we apologize for that. There was lots of people talking in the chat, and we wanted to get some feedback, but we'll have to do it this way for now. So this is like the good old days of spoilercast, where we record it on Skype and post it later. This will be fun. We'll do it the same way Captain Logan always does these things. Captain Logan isn't here for this one. He didn't get a chance to see the movie. But we'll go ahead and we'll go to each of you guys and say what your best thing is, what your worst thing is, what you just thought of the movie overall. So Dan, since you're the biggest World of Warcraft fan here, why don't you go first?
Well, I think my favorite thing about the movie was definitely the Horde side of the story, Duran specifically. I think he's obviously the most interesting and well-developed character in the movie. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I might be biased because I like the Horde in general in the Warcraft universe. I have always thought that their story is much more interesting than the Alliance one. The Alliance certainly has interesting characters, but I think overall I've just always been more interested in the Horde side of things. I found Duran's kind of struggle with Gul'dan and what was said about the traditions of the orcs interesting because it was consistent with the lore, and I think most of the movie's heart and what you feel for the characters comes from that side of things rather than the Alliance characters. I don't think they're as well defined and fleshed out as Duran and the relationship he has with his wife and the relationship he has with Ogrim Doomhammer, who's his best friend. So I liked all that stuff a lot. I think my worst thing is probably the movie tries to do too much and it lacks a central focus. I think if Duran was kind of the main character of the movie and we saw everything from his perspective, that would have served the narrative of this story better. But it's tough because the Warcraft universe is all about the Alliance and the Horde aren't necessarily good and evil. It's like there are good people on both sides and evil people on both sides. Like in this movie, Gul'dan is kind of like the main antagonist. We find out Medivh has been compromised, and he's not necessarily evil. He's just being manipulated. So they kind of tried to, make you feel for characters on both sides, but I don't think they were all as successful with the Alliance characters anyway. So I would have kind of pared it down and focused a little bit more on just Duran and the orcs coming to Earth as Azeroth for the first time.
Okay, Rasco?
So coming into this, I know of World of Warcraft. I've somewhat played World of Warcraft. I know the species, I know the world, but pretty much that's all I knew. So I was coming into this, not really expecting anything, and I'd heard a lot of bad things. And I gotta say, this movie has a rough start because it throws a lot at you really fast, and if you get it, it's very possible that it completely loses people, and then I can see the experience not paying off by the end. But for me, I stuck with it, and I really, really tried to give it a chance. And by the end, I think that it comes together in a weird way where it's like the characters are introduced, and they're all generic, besides Duran. But by the end, they're not. I don't think that by the end of this movie, because you see tons of people talk about how they think the human characters, they just didn't care about them. I've seen that everywhere, and I've seen people talk about how, just pretty much everyone was just very, there wasn't really a lot there on the page. And I can somewhat see that because we don't really get introduced to characters in a way where like you instantly get a grasp of who they are when they're introduced. It's very much like a very slow build, and if you stick with the film, by the end, I think it kind of comes together in a weird way. And that doesn't mean that it's okay that the beginning is so like breakneck pace, like everywhere jumpy and really confusing to like newcomers to this world. But I think it kind of saves the movie by the end. Like I think that the ending of this film was the strongest part, I'd say.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'm somewhere in between both of you guys where I played World of Warcraft a lot in high school, but it's been so long that I haven't gone back to it at all, so I don't really remember everything that I used to know. Like I used to be really big into strategy of that game and like who to ally with and what kind of material to get and stuff like that. So I used to like know this stuff like an encyclopedia, and now I just completely forgot. But even so, it's one of those movies where the more you know about that material, the more you can get from it. And I've seen lots of people post lots of references to the games from this movie and how this is setting up future installments and how it's connecting everything we've seen in the franchise so far. And that's really cool. It's definitely something that it takes a bit to get going. I think the best way to describe it is that it's kind of a fantasy melodrama where people don't really talk like people, but that's okay because they come off as generic and you get like some of the deeper stuff when you talk about like the epic fantasy vibe. My favorite thing about this overall is just magic. The magic in this game is freaking amazing. It feels like an actual fantasy epic in that way, and the ending fight is more exciting than anything in the Hobbit movies. I really, really like that stuff. But it does meander in places, and Dan, I agree with you where I feel like Duran should have been the main character more through the movie, especially when we talk about like his kid and his relationship to his wife and everything. I feel like some of that needed to be fleshed out more. And some of that pacing issues and some of that just there should have been more breathing room for characters. That stuff aside, I think this is actually a pretty enjoyable movie. It's exactly like Apocalypse for me, where it's like it's in the middle, but it leans more towards the good side than the bad.
Yeah, I agree. Multiple times I went to go see this with one of my friends, and I looked over at him multiple times. Like we were like, maybe halfway through the movie, 3/4 through the movie, and I looked over at him at one point. I'm just like, when is this movie gonna get bad? Because all of the reviews are saying this movie's awful, and I was having a great time watching it. I agree with you. I think this movie. I kind of disagree with you, Rasco, in that I think I understand where people are coming from, where they say the human character is generic. I think Khadgar and Lothar, they coast a lot on the performances of the actors, I think. Like, Lothar, I love the guy who played him, but, like, when his son gets trapped behind Medivh's magical barrier and dies, I didn't care about any of that happening.
He is such a bad actor, too. That kid is awful.
Yeah.
Yeah, he wasn't great. So, yeah, I mean, I wasn't necessarily invested in the human characters in the same way I was with the orcs, but that sort of comes from me knowing the games too. Like you mentioned Duran's kid, and as soon as I saw Duran having a child, I'm like, oh my god, it's Thrall, the best character in Warcraft. And this movie does start in an interesting place for the lore. I think you kind of need to start here to kind of tell the overarching story that is the Warcraft games. You could have started earlier with like the war between the orcs and the Draenei on Draenor, and like before the planet starts dying, but the humans aren't involved, and this is a Hollywood production, so we need to have humans as like central focus characters. So it's fine to start here, but I don't know, like this movie felt like a lot of setup to me. Like it's just kind of like a lore dump for people so that they can go see the next movies in the franchises when we get to characters like Thrall and Arthas, who are, for my money, the most interesting characters. Like there's cool stuff set up here with Thrall, I think, in that he's the best leader throughout the Warcraft lore that the orcs have, and any leader that comes after him or before him kind of falls short. And Thrall is kind of the guy that makes the hard decisions, but his heart's always in the right place, and he's a really great leader. But in this movie, he's only able to survive, and because of the Fel corruption, he's stillborn when they're going through the portal. And it's interesting that like Thrall fights against like his people being corrupted by the Fel when he's a leader in the games, and he always tries to return to like the shamanistic heritage of the orcs that are peaceful, like Duran does. But the Fel kind of saved his life, so that duality moving forward in a movie, if they focus on it, would be interesting. But that's moving forward. I think it was kind of a daring move on their part to kill off Duran in this movie. But did that hit home for you guys? Like I was kind of surprised that they did by the end here.
I really like that scene. That I think it was that moment when Duran dies and we have like that duel around like I want to say like 75% of the movie through. That was probably where I figured out, I think the critics are wrong. I think this is actually a pretty good movie. Because a lot of what we do with him as a character and a lot of what we do with like or culture and stuff that doesn't get extremely delved into here is still hinted at, and it's still really interesting. And when you get his death scene and you've seen how much he's tried to be more of a pacifist, and you go back to the beginning of the movie where like he doesn't seem to have like the stomach for what he's about to do, and the way they animate him, the CGI and stuff actually looks really good in the theater where he's exhausted or angry or just saddened. A lot of what makes that character work, I think, just comes from those small moments. And so when he died, I really figured out that, yeah, this is a melodrama. This is kind of what I want from an epic fantasy kind of movie.
Yeah, his death scene really works for me because it kind of establishes something that I think is probably the strongest aspect of the final act, in that I've seen some people say that there was nothing that they didn't predict about this movie. And they are absolutely liars, because I don't think anyone watches that scene and doesn't expect at the last second the other orc with the hammer to like come in and like help him, and then like everyone's expecting that. You've seen the scene a million times where the guy goes at he's fighting and he's looks like he's just about to die. It's the Luke Darth Vader scene from Return of the Jedi. You're expecting someone to come in and save him there. It doesn't happen. And I'm like, oh wow. And then we have the whole thing where you're expecting by the end, it's like this super happy thing where, the half-breed orc lady is like, she's with the humans and everything, and it doesn't go that route. It goes a different route that leaves the sequel inherently in a really interesting place, just where you pick up inherently.
Yeah. The way he dies too, I feel like a lot of people would have figured that he would have come back to life, just because the way he died, there's clearly magic in store or something to bring him back, and they don't do it. They kill him and then they keep moving forward. And I'm not sure about you guys, but did you feel like there were scenes missing of this movie? Does it feel like it should have been longer and it just got cut in places?
Yeah.
There are. I've seen interviews with Duncan Jones about this.
Okay.
And the scene that plays kind of odd where Medivh is talking to Garona, and he's talking about like going to Draenor and meeting an orcish woman that he falls in love with.
Yeah.
And you're thinking to yourself, like, is he implying that he fathered her or something? And in fact, Duncan Jones said there is a scene that explicitly tells you that, and you learn everything about Garona's backstory, but it was left on the cutting room floor. So there are a lot of scenes in this movie, I would imagine, that were cut. I especially thought that some of the stuff between Ogrim Doomhammer and Duran was cut, because Doomhammer seems to agree with Duran and then betray him and then agree with him again in the course of like 10 minutes in the movie.
That was my problem with it, because he kind of comes out of nowhere. He seems really sympathetic at first, and then for some reason he just keeps flip-flopping.
Yeah, see, like in the games, like they establish it decently that like Duran and Ogrim are like best friends that grew up together and stuff like that. But I think there were probably scenes with Ogrim kind of wrestling with, is it a good idea to defy Gul'dan? Do we need the fell magic to ensure the survival of our people? Is idealism worth sacrificing the orcish race? That's kind of the dilemma he's dealing with. But they don't really delve into that very much. And I would imagine there has to be some sort of motivation for that betrayal and then subsequent not unbetrayal after that.
Duncan Jones really knows his Warcraft, though, because there's so much here where you're making a reference to things that you wouldn't do unless you've played this material and been planning it for years. So I imagine that when this comes out, we're going to get like at least a 2.5 hour, if not 3 hour director's cut of it.
I really hope so. And you're right. He does know the lore quite a lot. I mean, there were tons of references that I noticed down to like there's a scene in the movie, I think it's Khadgar. He casts a spell and you can subtly see the level up animation happen from World of Warcraft. Like the yellow glow goes around him. You're like, oh, that's awesome.
That's
little
cool.
things like that. That are really, really cool to see if you're a fan of this stuff. And there's the obvious things, like there's a murloc in the background, one of the scenes that makes the noise and you hear it, and that's cool.
That was cool. It's really strange because I think this is a movie that, like, a longer cut can really, it can... BVS, that's a movie where, like, no matter what you add to it, there are still going to be inherent problems with that film. This is a movie where, like, I feel like a lot of criticism can be fixed if there are scenes that go... Because the beginning, I don't think needs to feel so jumbled. I feel like there are more scenes in the beginning of this film that have been cut out, because you really quickly jump around, and there are literally like 1 minute scenes. Like there's like it's like literally 60 seconds, and you cut somewhere else in the beginning of this film. And like I don't think that happens. I think that there's a longer scene that was cut down, and it hurts the film pacing wise in the first half. And I think those are all problems that can be addressed in a longer cut of the film.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of stuff here that's just a matter of questions not being addressed before there were anything that's like an inherently bad creative choice.
Yeah, and also like
I agree. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Rasco.
I was just gonna say, I think there's potentially some scenes cut from the human characters. I think there has to be a scene cut between the father and the son. I don't know any of their names. I'm sorry. But
Lothar. I don't know the son's name, but Lothar is the main human warrior character.
Lothar.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff with him. There's also a lot of stuff with what's his name, Gul'dan. There's a lot of stuff with Gul'dan that I really like. And I feel like there are places in this movie where he is trying to explain his plan more, and we just don't get them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and furthermore, I think the relationship between him and Medivh was probably more explicit in a longer cut of this movie, too. Because we see that, like, Gul'dan is manipulating fel magic in order to ensure the survival of his people and flee from the dying world that was killed because of their use of fel magic. And Medivh is being manipulated by that corruption to bring the orcs there for some reason. And it kind of plays like they're just working together out of coincidence, like they're both serving some sort of higher corruption power, which is a thing from the games. Like there is an entity that, in that is in charge of all that fel magic corruption that we'll probably see eventually.
Yeah, we see him when he transforms. Partially, he looks a lot like Saragars. Is that how you say his name? Saragars? Something like that?
Sargeras, yes,
Sargeras.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he does. He looks a little bit like Illidan to me too. The because he had the big horns.
Yeah.
The Night Elf Demon Hunter guy from Burning Crusade, and other Warcraft stuff. But anyway, yeah, I would imagine like. I've heard that in the novelization, like Gul'dan and Medivh like actually communicate, and Gul'dan is kind of in on the whole Garona being birthed thing, like that. He's somehow involved in that. So, yeah, in the interview I saw with Duncan Jones, he made it seem like a lot of the scenes were cut right before the movie came out. Like he said that the Garona thing was in the final cut of the movie, and it was cut right before they released it. So I think maybe the studio might have had a hand in taking some of that stuff out to make it a little bit shorter.
I think part of the problem is this is a movie that's very clearly trying to be Lord of the Rings with Warcraft lore, and the studio wanted a punchy action movie. And so they must have cut it down for that reason, because as it stands, there's some really interesting fantasy elements here. Like I love the idea of Gul'dan and Medivh and all that, and the Guardian stuff, and the way the other younger magicians are taken in as a kid, and like the whole political arrangement and the honor system and all of that. And it feels like, because of Duncan Jones' previous work, that would be his main focus. But every time we get close to answering some more of those interesting questions about magic and about the hierarchy of this world, it just cuts away and goes into an action scene.
Yeah, I agree. I think there were clearly some things cut with the humans, like Rasco mentioned as well. But I think, some of the other orc stuff that I thought might have been cut was like, Blackhand is kind of a non-entity here, like the war chief of the Horde. And they got Clancy Brown to play him, and Blackhand's kind of like a major character in the lore and stuff. I was like, there's no way that he was such a non-entity in the original draft of the script.
Yeah, no, that was surprising to me when I found out that was his name, because I recognized Clancy Brown's voice. I wasn't sure who he was in the movie, so I looked it up, and it's Blackhand of all people. I don't really get why you do that to that character.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's kind of like Gul'dan's puppet, but he's an interesting character in the lore. I wish they had done a little bit more with him, but I don't know. One of the things that I noticed as a positive about the movie, and Rasco mentioned a little bit about this when we were typing about this before we got in the call, like a couple days ago. I think the direction all around is pretty fantastic. Like the opening scene,
Yes.
where they sort of mimic a PvP confrontation, like out in the world from World of Warcraft, where a human just meets an orc and they beat the crap out of each other. And the camera angle where it's sort of like over the orc's shoulder and you can't see most of them, and you just see the giant weapon, and then we finally see the orc when he's coming down on the human. Like all of that's really creative direction stuff, and that's all over this movie. Like it's really competently made, I think.
Yeah,
I agree. Duncan Jones does a fantastic job just shooting it.
Yeah, the fights felt so brutal, and that was something that I wasn't expecting. I was expecting this movie to feel really tame when it came to the violence, but it's not. It is like savage, brutal fighting.
Yeah, there was one scene that I really wasn't expecting. I think it was an orc. He grabbed a human by the neck and just squeezed until he popped.
Yeah.
Oh my god!
When the king went to meet Duran in the middle of the movie, and we found out that it was a trap, and that whole action scene where they're just throwing swords through orcs, and the lightning's coming down. It's a pretty fantastical scene. It's a lot like what I think Battle of the Five Armies wanted to be by the end, but this movie got it down in a good 5 minutes and made it absolutely brutal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I also like how this movie didn't like end on like a super positive note as well. Like, because that would have felt really tonally inconsistent, because this feels like because of the brutality and stuff, like it doesn't feel like they're going for the same kind of like optimistic, hopeful like world that Lord of the Rings kind of tries to bring. Like Lord of the Rings, no matter how dark it gets, there's always like this note of optimism, and this movie has a very like melancholy ending that I think works because of how like brutal of a film it is.
It does. My only issue with that ending, though, is I wish Garona had more to do with the king specifically. Like I feel like there's a relationship there that would hit home a lot harder when she kills him.
Yeah.
If we got to see more of her and the king interact, and we got like a conversation about what this is supposed to mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I wanted scenes with Garona and the humans in general. Like the romance between her and Lothar, I don't think works at all.
I agree. That was just completely shoehorned in.
I definitely could have done without that. It just seemed like they threw a romance in there because, you got to hit all of the, watershed moments of a Hollywood movie to bring in the largest demographic,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
interestingly, though, they didn't advertise this movie well at all, and I figured that they would advertise at least that scene. Like the romance element is nowhere to be found in the trailers.
Yeah, that's true. Also,
that's true.
What's weird about it though is that it doesn't end how you would expect. Like it doesn't have the cliche romance, like two people of different worlds, star-crossed lovers, and in the end they're together. It doesn't end like that, which it could have been handled worse, I think, because it may feel shoehorned in because there's so little of it. There's like a scene, so it's like kind of weird by the end when he's like so betrayed. But at the same time, like I understand why she likes him. I don't understand why he likes her so much.
I kind of got the sense that, and a lot of this is interesting thematic stuff that doesn't go anywhere, but I kind of got the sense that he lost his wife, he lost his kid, and he's sort of in this place now where even as a human, he doesn't know where he fits into the kingdom. And then Garona comes in and she's got the exact opposite situation, but she also doesn't know where she fits in the human kingdom. So they just kind of connect over that. And I think that's interesting, particularly on his part, because he's such like a steadfast kind of guy. That he gets that moment where his son dies and he just gets drunk and he's all broken down. I think there's a lot of stuff you could do with the romance. The issue is just he's drunk and then they start a romance and then I don't know what happens to it.
Yeah.
I think there was some tension between them, like from the first scene they were in together, which I could see it going that way. Like when he had her in the cage and they were speaking, I was like, oh, this is going to turn into a romance, isn't it? And then like they had the scene where, they're at the campfire and he's sort of laughing at Khadgar because she says he wants to lay with me and all this stuff. Like I saw it coming a mile away. And that was like the one thing, to your point, Rasco, that I predicted pretty easily, even with, a lot of the stuff I saw coming because I knew the Warcraft lore and stuff, but they did change enough that I was surprised at some things. Like, there are some significant changes in here with characters and stuff. Like, Medivh and Garona are not related in the lore, and they're the ones that have a romance, and Garona's really half Draenei in the lore, just as an example. They did change some things for purpose of their narrative here, which is fine. I think most of the choices they made were good, but that was the one where I wasn't too sure about it. I want to ask you guys one thing that I've heard as a criticism of the movie. A lot of people are saying that the special effects aren't very good, and like the props and things aren't very good. I think for the most part, the CGI with the orcs, the main characters, is really well done. Like, all the performances of the main orcs, I think, were great, especially Duran. Like, that opening scene with him and his wife at the beginning, I was amazed at how good the CGI on the mocap on his face looked.
Yeah, it looked really good there.
Yeah, it was really great. And throughout other scenes in the movie, there was some, some other places where the orcs didn't look as well integrated, like when they had the entire horde rushing at the humans through the dark portal and stuff. I didn't think they looked as well integrated in places there. A lot of people have said that the props look kind of too cartoony and stuff. But I don't know, like, I kind of liked that. It was kind of charming because it looks exactly like the cartoony aesthetic of the games. Like, the cool thing about Warcraft is it has this cartoony aesthetic, but it also has that thing that Rasco was mentioning where thematically it kind of deals with war in a realistic way, where there's not really a good and an evil side. Like, there are people on both sides doing evil things and people on both sides doing great things, and the consequences of war are always dire for both sides, and there isn't really a true stalwart victorious side, and there's always great costs, and that's kind of what Warcraft has always been about, and I like that contrast to it. It seemed to work for some critics. I wanted to know what you guys thought about it.
Yeah, I think part of it's also that we're comic book guys and video game guys, and so it's very natural for us to look at something that is cartoony and take it completely straight and play it seriously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, it just, and not even as a criticism, but just like I can sit there with a book with a bunch of teenagers that are dressed in like gym costumes with capes that are bright yellow, and they're talking about like geopolitics, and I can roll with it. And so I guess for some critics that is a bit jarring, but like you said, I do like that contrast. And then also just from the nature of the video game, like the armors are so massive, and then here in this movie you see people put on helmets that are clearly too big for their faces. Some of that I kind of liked because of what you mentioned, because it reminds me of the video game, but then also just because in some of the performances, not all of them, I think it's very hit and miss, but with some of the performances, the actors are playing it straight enough to where the cartoony aesthetic adds a fascinating layer to it. Like, there's a lot of problems in CGI heavy movies where it looks like the actors aren't convinced of what's standing in front of them is actually there. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's really a problem here. So when you see people running around with like massive cartoony looking props interacting with CGI monsters, you're kind of used to what this game is meant to look like. You're kind of used to almost like the PlayStation level graphics. And it works. It feels like someone just took World of Warcraft, made an abridged cut of it, and then put it out in a theater.
Yeah, like, I'm glad that this film has that kind of cartoony aesthetic from the game, because, we have Lord of the Rings, we have Game of Thrones, like, we've seen this kind of, like, we've seen this aesthetic, like, the kind of, like, medieval, like, aesthetic. We've seen it before. Like, I'm glad that this movie doesn't look like any other movie.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, there were points where, with specific props, I was like, okay, that's really goofy looking. Like, the King's battle helmet.
Dude, I know, I'm right there. But I love it because it's so stupid.
Me too. I love... Like, I can understand where people are coming from, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, that is... goofiest looking helmet I've seen in a movie in a while.
No, yeah,
but I loved it.
Yeah. When he put that on, I was just like, oh my god. Oh.
Another thing I just want to ask everybody here, just out of curiosity, because we did talk about some of the special effects and stuff. Was there any moment in this movie where you were taken out either by the visuals or by a performance? Because one of the things that bugged me about it was I think Dominic Cooper is an amazing actor. I love him in everything he's done. There are scenes here where I'm not sure if he's playing an indecisive, timid king or he's playing a brave king in an impossible situation. And there's a lot of points here where I can't gauge his character based on the acting the way I can with others. And there's lots of just scattered performances here where sometimes they're amazing and sometimes they're just bland. Particularly because people don't seem to have consistent accents. Like, some people show up to this movie and they have like Southern American accents, and then other people are talking in like Thor style Shakespearean speak, and then other people are just kind of reading the script.
Yeah, that's another product of the Warcraft games too, which I'm kind of glad that they went with, but I can understand like it taking people out. Like, they have that medieval aesthetic in Warcraft, but I'm sure you know, like, if you play Alliance and you go around to the cities and talk to like human NPCs, they'll tell you to like have a good one, like modern, speak and stuff like that.
Yeah,
which is always kind of weird, but it's always adds to the charm. But yeah, it is really inconsistent. I mean, if we had delved into like the culture of Stormwind and like that kingdom and talked about those sort of things, like well, this movie isn't particularly good at world building. I don't think. Like, you don't get a good gauge of the human culture as much, and like the geography of the Eastern Kingdom's continent they're on. I think they do a decent job with the Orcish culture, because they sort of have to, because that's kind of the conceit for the ending of the film. It would have fallen flat on its face if they didn't do any of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wish the humans were a little bit more developed in general, and we knew more about them,
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff that I can just kind of extrapolate from knowing the material that I wish was more explicit here. And again, I think a lot of that just goes back to there is probably a longer cut of this movie.
Yeah, and I don't think they did anything here that is completely unsalvageable, where we can't go into a sequel and remedy any of those things. Like, yeah. Once they introduce Lordaeron, which is the sister kingdom of Stormwind, and they do the Arthas story, like that's a great opportunity to sort of just reintroduce the humans to us in some sort of way, because that's a completely different cast of characters that you'd be dealing with. I mean, Stormwind would be involved in the plot, but like you could totally just have people from Lordaeron be the principal human cast of the next movie or the one after that, depending on how far in time we jump. Like, I hope we don't get a movie where Thrall's like a teenager or a toddler next. Like, I want full grown Thrall in the next one if we get one.
Yeah, and to be fair, it should be. We should mention that the movie's doing abysmally in the U.S. side, but in China, it's made like 150 million in like a couple days.
Yeah, it's already outgrossed Force Awakens. Like, it's broken that record in like opening weekend numbers in China, which is insane.
Yeah, it's outgrossing Civil War. It outgrossed Fat Furious 7 and Age of Ultron. Like, it's set to be the biggest thing in China that they've gotten in a while.
I'm not surprised. Like, Blizzard games in general are so popular in Asia. StarCraft is the national sport of South Korea. I'm not even joking. People go to stadiums to watch people play StarCraft there. So, like, the World of Warcraft MMO has definitely it's not as culturally powerful as it used to be. I think this movie is kind of a little late in terms of hitting the zeitgeist of the American culture. Like, World of Warcraft has been slipping in terms of subscriber numbers for a number of years now, and they've been trying to release more frequent expansions to keep people, but it doesn't seem to be working as much. And like all of the big parodies of World of Warcraft, like the South Park episode and stuff, happened years ago now. So I think in terms of the United States audience, I can see it not doing as well, but those games are still so culturally powerful in Asia. I can see why it's doing better in China specifically.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see if it does get a sequel, because I would love to see more of this world developed. I'd love to see more of these characters explored, and particularly if, like you said, you fast forward a few years and you deal with like the evolution of these kingdoms after what happened at the end of this movie, because I don't think anyone was going to call it like Rasco said. So that's exciting. We know that at the very least the movie's going to make its money back. and Duncan Jones won't lose his career over it the way someone like Josh Trank probably has.
Yeah, and since this movie is doing so abysmally in the States, maybe this will be the sort of thing where, like, if they advertise the next one properly, it's really good and it gets good word of mouth. Most people haven't seen this movie, so they won't remember the first one as being a movie that they didn't particularly like, and they won't be deterred from seeing the second one. I mean, at least that's my hope.
Yeah. Is there anything else you guys want to mention?
Not particularly. I mean, I hope that we introduce some more species in the next one. It was cool to see like the high elves, and there was like, you know, a drawing of a Darkspear troll.
Yeah.
That Khadgar had at one point. I hope that we get more species more intimately involved. Duncan Jones said that the main focus of this was to introduce the conflict between the humans and the orcs, because that's always been like the central conflict of Warcraft, and then the other races just, you know, side with either one based on their self-interest. And I just hope that we introduce more races and more of this world in such a way where we're just not perpetually making setup movies where it's like, oh, we have to cram so much information in here, like, you know, the Tauren get introduced and the elves, and, you know, I don't know. I'd like to maybe get a story in this Warcraft universe that's a little bit more character focused and not so much more in the wide breadth of the world. But I don't know. They're trying to be Lord of the Rings, so maybe that's why they're, you know, taking that approach to it.
Yeah, I feel like maybe you could very easily just take one of the early expansions to the game and just take a select set of missions and turn that into a full-blown movie and not have to worry about explaining things, and then make it like a 3-hour kind of quest through the kingdom kind of thing. I think that'd be fine. I think it'd be fun. The only thing I think a sequel really needs to improve on, aside from just allowing the movie to be what it wants to be, where this doesn't seem to be the case here, is maybe do more of a balanced cast, because we have orc and human stuff here that's interesting and they interact here and there, but at least for me, it never really felt like the orcs and the humans had any sort of connection to each other. Like, you know, every time we saw them together, there were two factions, and I never got like a sense of this is a world inhabited by mystical creatures. It just kind of felt like a classic medieval story, and you throw orcs and magic in. And I kind of wish that there was like more fantastical integration. Like we talk about the idea of like the kingdom having a guardian and magic being a part of their honor system and such, but the humans never feel like they are characters that live in a fantastical universe. And there are snippets of it here and there, but I want the next movie, if we get one, to go full-blown epic fantasy. Someone sees a giant dragon coming out of the corner of the screen and no one thinks twice about it.
Yeah, it almost feels like the orcs are kind of the characters that the movie wants to focus on, and the humans are just reacting to them most of the time.
Yeah, and I guess part of that's just there because you can't make an entire CGI movie with nothing but orcs.
Oh, I wish they would, because the orcs are so much more interesting.
I agree, but I guess they just wouldn't be able to sell it that way.
Yeah, I mean, but then again, I really want them to make a movie. I just want Blizzard to make a movie out of the Arthas story and have him become the Lich King. Like that's all I want. That would be amazing. Like, you mentioned like the single story in the Warcraft universe type movie before. Like that would be the standalone Warcraft movie I'd want. As much as I love all the other characters in the Warcraft world and everything, I think Arthas' story from Warcraft 3 is kind of tailor-made to be made into a movie.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long it'll take for us to get to him since we started here, but at least we'll get Thrall in the next one, because he's awesome.
Yeah, I was really happy when we saw him there at the end. There's chances for that to be really interesting down the line. And I would love to know who plays Thrall when he grows up, because in this he's just a baby, and here Duran's played by Toby Kebbell, who's the guy from Prince of Persia, and he's the bad ape from Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, Koba.
He's also Victor. He's also Dr. Doom in Fan 4 Stick. Yes,
he's also Dr. Doom in Fan 4 Stick. So he's an actor I like a lot. And he's an actor that's really versatile, especially that's used to all this motion capture stuff. So if you're going to have him as Duran, just just out of like film trivia fun, I would love to have Andy Serkis show up and he's Thrall.
That'd be awesome.
There's lots of really great like motion capture actors out there now, and I think you could get away with making Thrall a really great performance as long as you have the budget and the actor behind it.
I would love every moment of that.
Because I mean, I like this movie. I think all three of us like this movie. It's just there's nothing about it, especially on a technical scale, that like competes with something like the new Planet of the Apes movies.
Yeah.
And I feel like this very easily could have been that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, those movies have the advantage of just kind of, being able to focus on a central character and tell a story about one person.
Right. Rasco, is there anything you wanted to mention before we close out?
Just gonna say, can we get Benedict Cumberbatch to be in the sequel? Can be an elf or something? Come on, let's do it.
That would be fun.
I'm trying to think of who we could play.
Off the top of my head, I don't really know, but I'm sure there's someone, and the moment we hit the end button, it'll come to us.
Let's just have him play Doctor Strange in the Warcraft universe. Come on, let's just do that.
So, just before we go in conclusion, do we recommend people go see this movie in the theater? Do we wait? Should we tell them to, wait till it comes out on DVD? Is it something worth going to see? You guys think?
I think that
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, yeah. I think if you give this movie a chance, the best possible experience you'll have with it is in the theater. I think that's when you'll be able to appreciate some of the mocap to the fullest extent. Like the very first shot of Duran's face is so convincing. It is like, whoa, this looks really good. And I don't know if you can appreciate things like that if you're watching it, or if you haven't at least seen it once on the big screen. It would be kind of harder to appreciate some of the aspects of this movie that are really, really just like, I mean, it's really well directed, and I think for the most part, it's a really beautiful looking movie, and like that's saying something, because I mean, like this movie could have turned out to just be like jumbled CGI mess, but I think Duncan Jones is a director that knows how to use CGI well. Like he's got a grasp of how to work with it and how to make it feel like it's there. It doesn't feel too much like an afterthought, whereas some CGI, it just doesn't integrate well into the movie. Like I don't know. I think he knows what he's doing. Is he going to be attached to this franchise moving forward?
We don't know.
That's a very good question.
Yeah, he's talked about the movie after it's come out. He's addressed some questions here and there. Dan's mentioned interviews, but there's still no word on where this movie is going to go, or whether or not this will really even be a franchise. But I imagine, as much as I think he could do more with another movie, I feel like just for a business standpoint, he won't get hired for a sequel, and they'll probably try to go a different direction to appeal to more people.
Yeah.
Which is a shame. But no, I'm with you, Rasco. I think this is a movie that is definitely the most fun in a theater, and having the crowd react to things, at least from my experience, is part of the fun. Because there were moments here and there where Duran died, and there were some gasps from the audience. And when the action scenes get crazy, people physically react to it. And just being in the theater environment, looking at this incredibly bizarre world with all this CG and this massive cast of characters that has a massive history that you can willingly look up if you want to. I think it's just more fun than sitting at home and watching it.
Yeah, I agree with you guys 100% on the theater thing. I do not regret seeing it in the theater. I would go again if someone asked me to. I had a great time watching it, especially because I loved the score for this movie so much too. Like the main theme for this movie is awesome. I really, really like it. And it's so unfortunate that this movie was marketed with crappy dubstep when they had this good of a main theme.
Yeah.
I agree. The soundtrack's fantastic.
Yeah.
Like the opening theme of the movie where we're introduced to Duran and the humans, and then we cut to the Warcraft logo and the theme starts playing with the war drums and stuff. It makes one want to yell victory or death for the Horde. It's awesome. It's so good.
I agree. It's great. It's a soundtrack that I will go back to from time to time. I think it's really good.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm kind of surprised that all three of us are as positive on this movie as we are, given the critical reaction. But I think, you know, to whoever's watching, go check it out and see for yourself. This is one I don't necessarily agree with the critics on.
Oh yeah, this is this is certainly like an X-Men Apocalypse type thing where you do not know how you will feel about this movie until you've seen it. Do not trust how, like, you cannot look at some of the critical backlash that this film has got, because X-Men Apocalypse had that, and there are a lot of people that really loved X-Men Apocalypse. There are a lot of people that really hated it, and this is a similar movie. I think you're either gonna like be able to, it's either gonna completely lose you, or you'll be able to see what really works in the movie, and you'll be able to latch onto that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, as far as critical reactions go, there are movies that deserve all the praise they get, like Civil War, and then there are movies that deserve all the hate they get, like BVS, and then there are movies like Apocalypse and Warcraft where they're in the middle, and the only way you're ever going to know how you feel is if you just sit down and watch it. But there is nothing about this that's mind-blowingly genius. There's nothing about this that's offensively bad. There's just a bunch of things you may or may not latch onto.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with, you know, exactly how you put that. I think there are definitely people that are watching this video. If they go see the movie on a recommendation, they may come out hating this movie because it definitely has narrative issues. Like, there are problems in this movie where the story isn't working on every level. But just I was able to overlook a lot of those things and just have a good time watching the movie overall. Like, I acknowledge those things are problems. This isn't a perfect movie. It's not even really a well put together movie as a whole, I don't think. But I don't know. I enjoyed watching it. I thought it was a good time.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a fun ride, if nothing else. I'd liken it to something like Pacific Rim, but I think Pacific Rim is generally a good movie.
Yeah, I think Pacific Rim's a little bit tighter of a narrative than this.
Yeah, it's definitely the same kind of feel, though. So, like, for example, if you don't like fantasy movies, you won't like this. If you don't like complicated factions and multiple characters and such, you won't like this. There's definitely lots of things in here that just factor into taste. But if you are a World of Warcraft person, or you do like the epic fantasy vibe, you like Lord of the Rings and stuff, there's lots to latch onto here. In the same way, if you're like a mech anime kind of guy, there's lots to latch onto with Pacific Rim.
That's true. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's going to be it. Thanks for joining me, guys. This was fun.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Let us know what you thought in the comments, whether you agree or disagree with anything we said. If you saw the movie, do you agree with the critics? Do you not? Do you think the reaction to this is crazy? Is it the best video game movie ever made? Is it not? Just out of curiosity, it'd be good to know if people think video game movies are still really bad, or maybe if they're getting better. But thanks everyone for watching, and we will see you next time.